Abigail Carter patted the last shovel of earth flat over her father's grave and swore aloud that no living soul would ever get close enough to hurt her again. 3 years passed. Every ranch hand in the valley broke against her and rode away until a quiet mountain cowboy named Harvell came through her gate one summer morning and refused to go. If you love a story about a wounded heart learning to trust again, subscribe and stay with me all the way to the end. And comment the city you're watching from so I can see just how far this story travels. Nobody in Silver Creek Valley could rightly explain why a man would ride toward Carter Ridge Ranch on purpose. They understood men riding away from it. That happened every few weeks, regular as the sun. A hand would show up hungry and hopeful, hat in his hand and a bedroll on his back. And 30 days later, he'd be sitting in the back of Doyle's saloon, nursing a whiskey and a bruised pride, telling whoever would listen that no wage on God's earth was worth another hour under Abigail Carter. But on that dry summer morning in 1885, a lone cowboy came down out of the high country and turned his horse straight through the ranch gate like a man who had nowhere better in the world to be. The old fence mender, Silas, saw him first and near dropped his hammer. "Mister," Silas called out, "you lost." The rider reined up. He was tall in the saddle, wide through the shoulders, with a weathered face and a thick dark beard that hid whatever expression a man might have read there. He looked to be somewhere past 35, the kind of age a man only reached in the mountains by being harder than the country that tried to kill him. "Reckon not," the stranger said. "This the Carter place?" "It is." Silas glanced back toward the main house like a man checking the weather before a storm. "You come about the work?" "I have." "Then you're lost," Silas said flatly, "even if you're standing where you meant to stand." The stranger swung down off his horse without another word. He loosened the cinch, checked the animal's legs the way a man does when he loves the horse more than he loves talking, and looped the reins over the rail. "Name's Harvell," he said. "Silas." The old man wiped his palm on his trousers before he shook. "I'll give you a piece of advice free, Harvell, on account of I already like you, and I'd hate to see it wasted. Get back on that horse." Harvell tipped his hat back an inch. "That's so. That's so." Silas leaned close, lowering his voice. "Miss Carter's run off 14 men in 3 years. 14. Good men. Strong men. Men who could rope a steer blindfolded and break a horse before breakfast. She chews 'em up and spits out the pieces, and she don't even smile doing it. There ain't a soul in this valley'll say a kind word about her, and there ain't a soul she'll say one back to. She hire on hands, or don't she? She hires 'em." Silas shook his head slow. "Keeping 'em's a different matter." Harvell looked past the old man toward the house. "Then I'll speak with her." "Mr. "Obliged for the warning, Silas." He touched his hat brim, polite as Sunday. "But a man that turns around every time somebody tells him to'd never get anywhere at all." He walked up toward the house, boots steady on the hard-packed ground, and Silas watched him go the way you'd watch a man walk into a river he hadn't measured. She met him on the porch before he reached the steps. Abigail Carter was 28 years old, though the way she held herself made her seem older and harder both. She stood with her arms folded, and her chin level, and her eyes already narrowed against him, and she spoke before he had the chance to. "Whatever you're selling, I don't want it." "Ain't selling, ma'am." "Then you're begging, and I've got less use for that." Harvell stopped at the bottom of the steps. He didn't climb them. He took his hat off instead, held it against his chest, and let a silence sit between them long enough that most men would have filled it with an apology. He didn't. "I heard you were short on hands," he said. "You heard wrong. I'm not short on hands. I'm short on men who can do the work." Her eyes went over him once top to bottom and dismissed him just as quick. "And you look like every other one who's come up that road thinking a strong back and a sad story would move me." "I don't have a sad story, ma'am." "Everybody's got a sad story." She said it flat like a fact about the weather. "Mine's just meaner than most." Harvell almost smiled. He caught it before it got loose. "I can start today. You can start walking is what you can do." She unfolded her arms and set her hands on the porch rail and leaned toward him. Let me save us both the trouble, mister. You won't last a month. Nobody does. You'll work a week thinking you can outlast me. Second week, you'll start grumbling. Third week, you'll tell yourself you're too good for this. And by the fourth, you'll be down at Doyle's crying into a bottle about the witch on the mountain who wouldn't let you be a hero. I've watched it 14 times. I don't have the patience to watch it 15. Harvell turned his hat slow in his hands. When he spoke, his voice was low and even and gave nothing away. Then I suppose we'll find out? Something crossed her face, quick gone before it could be named. Surprise, maybe, or the memory of surprise from some earlier year when she still let herself feel it. $30 a month, she said sharply, like she was throwing a stone. You sleep in the bunkhouse. You eat what's cooked. You don't come to the main house unless there's blood or fire, and if there's blood, I'd better hear whose it is before I hear your voice. You work sun up to dark, and then you work after dark if I say so. You call me Miss Carter, and nothing softer. And the first morning you decide you know better than me how to run my ranch. You can pack that bedroll, and I'll never think of you again. Fair? Harvell said. She blinked. Fair. You laid out the terms. I took 'em. That's fair. He put his hat back on. Where do you want me? For a long moment, Abigail Carter just looked at him, and there was something working behind her eyes that she didn't let show, the same something that made men uneasy and made her lonely, and that not one of the 14 had ever bothered to look for. The south fence is down in 3 places, she said finally. Cattle have been getting through into the ravine. You lose 1 steer down there, it's coming out of your pay. Understood. Silas'll show you the line. He already tried to talk me out of the job. Then he's smarter than you. She turned to go inside, then stopped with her hand on the door. She didn't look back at him. One more thing, mister. Harvell. One more thing, Harvell. Her voice had dropped, and for just an instant, the hardness thinned out of it into something almost tired. Don't go telling yourself you're going to fix anything up here. This ranch doesn't need fixing, and I surely don't. She went inside and shut the door before he could answer. Harvell stood there a moment. Then he walked back down to where Silas was pretending very hard not to have been listening. Well, the old man said. South fence, Harvell said. 3 places down. Silas let out a low whistle. She gave you the ravine work first thing. That's a test, that is. That's her seeing how fast you'll quit. Then let's not fail it, Harvell said, and picked up a coil of wire. The bunkhouse held 2 other men that summer, and neither of them had lasted long enough yet to be worth remembering names for, though their names were Pete and Elias. They watched Harvell unroll his bedding that first night, the way animals watch a new animal come into the pen. You the new one, Pete said. I'm the new one. How long she give you? Harvell sat down on the edge of the bunk and pulled off 1 boot. She give me $30 a month. That ain't what I asked. Pete grinned, but it was a mean, tired little grin. How long she say you'd last? She always says. Told me 2 weeks. Told Elias here she wouldn't waste the guess. Told me a month, Harvell said. Elias snorted from the far bunk. A month. She likes you. Didn't seem like it. Oh, she don't like anybody, Pete said. But a month, that's practically a proposal from her. She told the last fella he wouldn't see out the week, and he didn't. Cried when he left. Grown man. Cried. Harvell pulled off the other boot and set it beside the first lined up neat. Why do you stay? Pete's grin faded. Pays good, and works honest, and there ain't nowhere else hiring this side of the pass. He lay back on his bunk and stared up at the rafters. And a man's got his pride. I ain't gonna let some woman run me off her land like I'm nothing. She ain't some woman, Elias said quietly. She's the woman broke 14 men, and she'll break you and me too, and there ain't a thing prideful about staying to watch it happen. Harvell said nothing. He lay down and pulled his hat over his eyes. You don't talk much, Pete said. No. That'll change. This place either makes a man talk or makes him leave. Ain't a quiet one lasted yet." Under his hat in the dark, Harvell almost smiled again. He was up before the sun and out at the south fence before Silas had the coffee boiling, and by the time Abigail rode down the line to check on him mid-morning, he'd already set 2 of the 3 broken sections and was sweating over the 3rd. She sat her horse a distance off and watched him work without a word for a good while. He knew she was there. He didn't turn around. "That knot won't hold," she said at last. Harvell finished the wrap, gave it a hard pull to test it, and only then looked over his shoulder. "It's holding. It'll hold till the first steer leans on it. Then it'll slip, and you'll have your cattle in the ravine, and your pay in my pocket." He straightened up slow. "You want to show me how you'd tie it? Miss Carter, I'll listen. But if you're just here to tell me it's wrong and ride off, I've got 2 more sections and no daylight to waste on being told." The words hung in the summer air. It was the kind of thing that had earned other men their walking papers on the spot. Talking back to Abigail Carter was the same as spitting in a preacher's face. Everybody knew it, and everybody knew what came after. But she didn't ride off, and she didn't fire him. She swung down off her horse instead. "Move," she said. He stepped aside. She crouched at the fence post, undid his knot with 2 hard tugs of her gloved hands, and retied it in a way he'd never seen, a doubled twist cinched back on itself, quick and ugly and strong. "That's how my father did it," she said, not looking at him. "This wire's old, and the posts are older, and the pretty knot won't survive the winter, and I don't have money for new fence, so we make the ugly knot and it holds. You understand?" "I understand." She stood and brushed the dust off her knees. And for just a moment, kneeling there in the memory of her father's hands, something had gone soft in her face without her permission, and then she felt him watching, and it shut like a door. "Don't look at me like that," she said. "Like what, ma'am?" "Like you saw something." Her voice went cold and flat again. "You didn't. Fix the fence." She mounted up and rode back toward the house, and Harvell watched her go, and then he crouched down and studied that ugly, stubborn knot for a long moment, before he tied the next one exactly the same way. The trouble that summer had a name, and the name was Thomas Blackwell. Harvell heard it first from Silas 3 days in, while they were doctoring a steer that had cut itself on the bad wire, before Harvell had gotten to it. "You'll meet him," Silas said, holding the animal's head while Harvell worked. "Blackwell owns half the valley and wants the other half. Owns the bank in Silver Creek, owns the freight road, owns most every man's note who ever borrowed $1. And he wants this ranch worse than he's ever wanted anything." "Why this one?" "Water." Silas nodded up toward the high ground. "Carter Ridge sits on the only good spring above the valley. Whoever holds that spring holds the whole valley's throat in his hand. Old man Carter knew it, kept the ranch small and poor and stubborn just so he'd never have to sell. And when he passed..." The old man stopped himself. "When he passed..." Harvell prompted low. Silas shook his head. "Ain't my story to tell, and it ain't a kind one. You want to keep this job, you don't ask Miss Carter about her daddy. And you sure as sin don't ask her about the year after." Harvell tied off the last stitch and let the steer up. It scrambled away bawling. "What happened the year after?" he asked. Silas looked at him a long time. "A man come through," he said finally. "Charming, fine words. Told her he loved her. Told her he'd help her save the ranch." The old man's jaw tightened. "He was Blackwell's man the whole time. Sent to get close to her. Get her to sign papers she didn't understand, near took the whole place out from under her before she caught it. And when she caught it..." He shook his head. "That's the woman you're working for, son. She trusted somebody once with everything she had left in the world, and he handed her over to the wolf smiling the whole time. So when she tells you she don't need fixing, and she don't need you, and you won't last a month..." Silas met his eyes. "She ain't being cruel. She's being careful. There's a difference if you're patient enough to see it." Harvell wiped his hands slow on a rag. "I'm patient," he said. Blackwell came up to the ranch himself the following week. He came in a fine buggy with a fine horse and a fine coat, and 2 men on horseback rode alongside him who were not there for the scenery, and he stepped down in the yard like a man setting foot on land he already believed was his. Abigail came out onto the porch. She did not invite him up. "Mr. Blackwell." "Miss Carter." He swept his hat off and bowed a little, and his smile was wide and warm and didn't reach any part of him above the teeth. "You're looking well. Isolation agrees with you. State your business and get off my land. Now." He clucked his tongue. "Is that any way to greet a man come to offer you a kindness? The last kindness you offered me near cost me everything I own. That was a misunderstanding, and Mr. Reeves acted alone, and I've told you as much." His voice stayed smooth as poured cream. "I've come today with an honest number, a generous number, more than this poor ridge is worth by half." He named a figure, and it was a lot of money, and every hand on the place who heard it went still. Abigail did not go still. "No," she said. "Miss Carter, be reasonable. You're a woman alone. Your hands run off faster than you can hire them. The bank note your father left comes due at summer's end, and we both know you can't meet it. You can sell to me now on good terms with your dignity, or you can lose it to me at auction come September with none. I'd think a sensible woman would prefer the first." The mention of the note landed hard. Harvell, standing back by the barn with the others, saw her flinch at it just barely, just at the corner of her mouth, and saw her hide it the same instant. "Get off my land," she said again, quieter this time, which was worse. Blackwell's smile finally slipped. "You'll regret this. You've regretted less. Off my land." One of Blackwell's riders nudged his horse forward a step, hand drifting easy toward his hip, and the yard went tight as a drawn wire, and Harvell was already moving. He crossed the yard without hurry, without a word, and put himself between the mounted man and the porch, and stood there with his hands loose at his sides and his eyes level. "Lady told you, gentlemen, it was time to go," he said. The rider looked down at him. "And who in hell are you? Nobody worth your trouble." Harvell didn't blink. "Which is exactly why you don't want it." For a long moment, nothing moved. Then Blackwell laughed a short dismissive bark and climbed back up into his buggy. "A hired man. How touching. Miss Carter, you've found yourself a knight." He took up the reins. "Enjoy him while he lasts. They never last, do they?" He drove off, his riders falling in behind, and the dust of them hung in the yard a long time after they were gone. Abigail stood on the porch and stared at the empty road, and her hands were gripping the rails so hard the knuckles had gone white. The other hands drifted back to their work, muttering. Harvell stayed. "You shouldn't have done that," she said. She still hadn't turned around. "He had a man reaching for a gun. He wouldn't have used it. Not here. Not with witnesses. Blackwell does his killing with paper, not lead." She turned then, and her eyes were bright and hard and furious, and the fury wasn't aimed at Blackwell at all. "I don't need you standing between me and anything. Do you understand me? I have handled that man for 3 years without a single soul at my back, and I will handle him for 30 more. And the day I need a hired hand to protect me is the day I—" Her voice cracked, just slightly, just on the last word. And she heard it crack, and the horror of having been heard cracking was written all over her, and she stopped. Harvell said nothing. He didn't step closer. He didn't reach out. He just stood there in the yard, hat in his hand, and let her have the silence to put herself back together in. "I don't need you," she finished low. "No, ma'am," he agreed. "I don't reckon you do." She stared at him, thrown by the ease of it, waiting for the argument that didn't come. "Then why'd you step in?" Harvell put his hat back on. He thought about the question longer than most men would have, like it deserved a true answer instead of a smooth one. "Because a man ought to stand where he's needed," he said, "whether or not he's wanted." "Those ain't the same thing, Miss Carter. You said it yourself, you don't need me." He turned to go back to his work. "You never said I wasn't needed. And he walked away and left her standing on the porch with the words. And she watched him go, and for the first time in 3 long years, Abigail Carter did not have the last word, and could not for the life of her decide whether that made her want to fire him, or made her want to sit down on the porch steps and weep. Bam. That night when the bunkhouse had gone dark, and Pete's snoring had started up, Elias spoke quiet across the room. "You stepped in front of Blackwell's man today." "I did." "That was either the bravest thing I ever saw or the stupidest, and I ain't decided which." "Neither have I," Harvell said. Elias was quiet a while. Then, "You know what she is, don't you? What they say about her." "I know what they say. 14 men, Harvell. 14 good men she broke and threw down the mountain. What makes you think you're different?" Harvell lay in the dark and thought about the ugly, stubborn knot her father had taught her, the one she'd tied with her own hands, so it would hold through the winter she couldn't afford new fence for. He thought about the flinch at the mention of the note. He thought about the crack in her voice and the horror of being heard. "I don't think I'm different," he said finally. "Then you'll leave like the rest." "No." Harvell pulled his hat down over his eyes. "I think she's different. I think everybody up and down this valley looked at that woman and saw a witch on a mountain, and not one of 'em ever stopped to ask what a person's got to survive to build walls that high. 14 men rode up here wanting to be her hero. Not one of 'em wanted to just be her hand." He was quiet a moment. "I don't need to be anybody's hero, Elias. I've been alone a long time. I know what it looks like on somebody else." Elias didn't answer for a while. When he did, his voice had changed. "That fella that come through," he said. "The one that betrayed her. You know what the worst of it was? It wasn't the papers, wasn't the money. It was that he made her believe him. This whole valley thinks she's cold. I was here that year, Harvell. I seen her before. She wasn't cold at all. She was the warmest, laughingest girl in Silver Creek, and she loved that snake with her whole entire heart, and he burned it out of her a purpose on another man's orders for money." Elias let out a long breath in the dark. "You want to know why she runs everybody off? She ain't protecting the ranch. She's protecting the last little bit of herself she's got left. And she figures if she never lets anybody close enough to matter, then nobody can ever do that to her again." Ora. Harvell lay still and listened to the mountain wind pushing at the bunkhouse walls. "How long ago?" he asked. "Since she laughed." 3 years, Elias said. "Give or take." Harvell closed his eyes. He'd come down out of the high country that summer with a worn saddle and no family and no home and no reason to stop any place in particular. He'd told himself he was just looking for work. $30 a month and a bunk and food a man didn't have to hunt himself. But he lay there in the dark that night in the ranch of the woman nobody could handle in the valley that had already decided he'd fail, and he made himself a quiet promise that he told no one, not Elias, not Silas, not even fully himself. He was going to be the first man who stayed long enough to find out who Abigail Carter had been before the world taught her to bury it, and he was not going to leave in a month. He was not. He decided going to leave it all. Outside, the summer wind came down off the ridge and moved through the dry grass and up in the main house. A single lamp burned late into the night behind a curtained window, because the woman nobody could handle was awake too, sitting at her father's desk with the bank's letter open in front of her, and the number that would take everything from her come September, and she was thinking against every hard-won lesson she'd sworn to live by about a quiet man who'd stepped in front of a gun for a woman who told him plainly she didn't need him, and she was thinking the most dangerous thought she'd allowed herself in 3 years. What if this one doesn't leave? She blew out the lamp before the thought could take root, but in the dark it took root anyway. The lamp in the main house was still burning when Harvell rose the next morning, and he noticed it the way a man notices a thing he isn't supposed to see and files it away without a word. He'd learned that about her already in only a handful of days. Abigail Carter didn't sleep. She worked the daylight like it was chasing her, and then she sat up half the night with the ledgers, and by the look of the shadows under her eyes, she'd been doing it long enough that it had stopped being a choice and turned into who she was. He said nothing about it. He fed the horses, he pulled his gloves on, and he walked out to the north pasture where she'd told him a calf had gone missing in the night. She was already there. "You're late," she said. "Sun's not up." "I've been up an hour." "Then you're early," Harvell said, "and I'm on time, and the calf's still missing either way." "Which direction?" She almost said something sharp. He watched her decide against it, watched her swallow the reflex, and it was such a small thing, but he'd come to understand that with Abigail Carter, the small things were the only things that ever moved. "Ravine," she said. "Same as always. That fool wire of yours." It held. "I checked it at first light. She didn't go through the fence, Miss Carter. She went over the top by the wash where the ground's high. Fence can't stop a calf that jumps." Abigail turned and looked at him. "You checked the fence before you came out here?" "I did." "Before the sun. Wire doesn't need the sun to tell you if it's cut." She was quiet a moment, and then she turned her horse toward the wash without another word, and that was as close to "you were right" as Abigail Carter came, and Harvell knew it, and took it, and followed. They found the calf an hour later, wedged down in a cut of rock, with its leg twisted under it, bawling itself hoarse. It was a bad spot, steep and loose, and the mother was up top pacing the edge and screaming. And any fool could see what had to be done, and any fool could also see it was going to be dangerous doing it. "I'll go down," Abigail said, already dismounting. "No, ma'am." She stopped. "What did you say to me?" "I said no." Harvell was already tying the rope off to his saddle horn, testing it, wrapping the free end around his forearm. "You go down there in that skirt, you slip. You break something, then there's two of you stuck, and one of me and I can't carry you both up. I go down. You work the horse and haul when I say haul. That's the sense of it, and you know it's the sense of it." For a moment he thought she'd fight him just to fight him. Then she took the rope. "If you drop my calf," she said, "you're paying for it. If I drop your calf, I'll have bigger troubles than the pay." He went over the edge. It was worse than it looked from the top. The rock was crumbling, and the footing was a lie every third step, and twice his boots slid out from under him, and only the rope kept him off the bottom. He could hear her up above, not panicking, just steady feeding the line and calling down, clear and short. "Left. There's a ledge. Put your weight left." And he realized, somewhere in the middle of it, that she was good at this, better than good, that she'd spent her whole life on this mountain and knew every treacherous inch of it, and that the thing keeping him alive right now was her voice. He reached the calf. It fought him terrified, and he got the rope under it and around it and hollered up, and the horse leaned into the pull, and the calf came up screaming, and Harvell came up behind it, half-dragged, and when he cleared the edge and lay there in the dirt gasping, the first thing he saw was Abigail Carter's face, and for one unguarded second it was white with fear. Fear for him. She saw him see it, and it slammed shut again so fast he might have dreamed it. "You're bleeding," she said, all business, looking at his forearm where the rope had burned him raw. "I'll live." "You'd better. I don't hire men so I can watch them die in a ravine on the third morning. Wouldn't dream of the inconvenience." And she almost laughed. He heard it, the breath that caught in her throat and started to be a laugh before she strangled it, and Elias's words came back to him from the dark of the bunkhouse. 3 years since she laughed, give or take. Harvell filed that away too, that half a laugh the way he'd filed the burning lamp, and he said nothing about it, and he let her bandage his arm rougher than she needed to, and he understood that the roughness was its own kind of apology. Word of the ravine went around the bunkhouse by supper, the way everything did. "You went down Miller's Cut," Pete said, staring at him over the beans. "On a rope, for a calf. For the job. Ain't no job worth Miller's Cut. Man died down there. Before your time. Before all our time." Pete shook his head slow. "She let you go down." "I didn't ask her leave." Elias laughed, a real one. "You didn't ask her." He set his spoon down. "Harvell, in 3 years I never once seen a man tell that woman no and keep his job past sundown. You've told her no twice that I heard of, and she's still feeding you." She's not feeding me. She's paying me. I feed myself. You know what I mean." Elias leaned in, and his voice dropped, and Pete leaned in too, because a bunkhouse is a place where men are always half-starved for something to talk about. "I mean, she's listening. She don't listen. Not to nobody. Not to the preacher, not to the banker, not to God Almighty. And she listened to you about that fence knot. And she listened to you about the calf. And today she let you go down Miller's cut when she'd have gone herself and died before she let another soul do it." He sat back. "I've been trying to figure you and I can't." Nothing to figure. There's always something to figure with a quiet man. Elias pointed his spoon. "The loud ones you know inside a day, the quiet ones." He shook his head. "What are you doing here, Harvell?" "Truly, a man handles himself like you do, cool with a gun at his hip, steady on a rope. Don't flinch at Blackwell, nor at her, you could get on anywhere. Big spread down in the valley'd pay you double, and you'd never once have to go down a ravine or take a tongue lashing off a woman half your size. So why here? Why this place?" And Harvell looked at the two of them across the lamplight, and for a moment something in him wanted to say the true thing, the thing he'd promised himself in the dark. Because somebody in this valley ought to stay long enough to find out who she was. He didn't say it. "Work's work," he said, and got up and took his plate to the wash bucket, and Elias watched him go, and said to Pete low, "That man's lying, and I can't tell if it's to us or to himself." Time. The days built one on another, the way days do, and Harvell kept his head down, and his promises kept, and slowly the ranch began to notice him. The way you notice a fence post you didn't set. You don't remark on it, but one day you realize the line stands straighter than it did. He mended what was broken before she asked. He rose before her and worked past her. He never once complained, never once asked for thanks, never once tried to draw her into the kind of talk the 14 before him had used to try to worm past her walls. He didn't flatter her. He didn't pity her. He treated her day in and day out like exactly what she said. She was the owner of a ranch and the boss of a job. And it was driving her out of her mind. She caught herself watching for him. That was the first thing, and it horrified her. She'd be at the Ledgers, and she'd hear the bunkhouse door, and she'd know his step from the others before she'd decided to know it. She'd ride the line and find herself turning toward wherever she'd left him working. She told herself it was because he was new and she was watching for him to fail like the rest. But the failing never came, and the watching didn't stop. And one evening she stood at the window with the lamp behind her and watched him break a green colt in the far corral patient. So patient, no whip, no shouting, just his hands and his low voice, and hours of the same quiet insistence until the animal gave up its fear all on its own. And she pressed her hand flat against the cold glass without knowing she'd done it. Then she saw her own reflection doing it, and she yanked the hand back like the glass had burned her, and she blew out the lamp, and she did not sleep. The reckoning came on a Sunday over the account books, which was the only place Abigail Carter ever truly bled. Harvell found her at the corral fence at dusk, and she was not herself. She was still and pale, and her jaw was set in a way he'd learned meant she was holding something at bay by main force. "Miss Carter." "Not now. You look like a woman got bad news." I said not now. But she didn't walk away, and he'd learned to read that too. The not now that stayed put was an invitation from a woman who didn't know how to make one. He leaned on the fence a little way down from her. He didn't crowd her. He looked out at the same nothing she was looking at. "Note come due," he said. It wasn't a question. She turned her head sharp. "How do you—" "How?" "Blackwell said it, in the yard, summer's end." Harvell kept his eyes on the corral. "And you've been sitting up every night with the lamp burning, and a person doesn't sit up every night with the lamp burning over cattle counts. That's ledger trouble, bank trouble. You've been watching my window. I've been walking to the outhouse past your window, ma'am, same as every man on this place, and yours is the only lamp still lit at 2 in the morning. He let a silence sit. "How bad?" She didn't answer. "How bad, Miss Carter?" And something in her broke loose, not the wall, Not yet, but a single stone falling from it. One confession she couldn't hold behind her teeth another second. Bad enough that Blackwell already knows he's won, she said low and bitter. The note's $400, due the 1st of September. I have, her voice caught. I have 110, and 40 head I could sell if the market didn't know I was desperate, which it does, because Blackwell owns the buyers, same as he owns everything else in this valley, and they'll offer me half what the cattle are worth, because they know I've got no choice. She laughed, and there was no laugh in it. So there it is. That's the great secret of Carter Ridge. Come September, I lose everything my father built, everything he died holding on to the same man who... She stopped herself hard. And there's not a thing on God's earth I can do about it. Harvell was quiet a long moment. There's the spring, he said. She went still. What? Silas told me. Carter Ridge sits on the only good water above the valley. That's why Blackwell wants it so bad. He doesn't want your cattle nor your grass. He wants that spring because whoever holds it holds every ranch below it by the throat. Harvell turned to face her. Now a spring like that's worth a sight more than $400, Miss Carter. It's worth thousands. So my question is, why are you letting a man take the whole ranch over a $400 note when you're sitting on water half the territory would bid on if they knew it was for sale? Because I'm not selling the water. She rounded on him fierce. That's the point. My father spent his whole life keeping that spring out of Blackwell's hands, keeping this valley free of him. And I will lose this ranch dead before I hand that man the one thing. I didn't say sell it to Blackwell. She stopped. There's other men with money in this territory, Harvell said, slow and even. Cattlemen. Ranchers down the valley who've been under Blackwell's boot for years, paying his prices, borrowing at his bank, because he's got the only water and the only bank and the only say. What do you reckon a spring above their land is worth to men like that, Miss Carter? Men who'd give a great deal to have a water source that isn't Thomas Blackwell's. You don't sell the ranch. You sell shares in the water. To the very men Blackwell's been squeezing. You raise your $400 10 times over. You pay off the note, you keep your land, and every dollar you take does double work because it buys you allies. A whole valley of them. Men with a stake in seeing you keep that spring because their cattle drink from it now too. He let it land. Blackwell's whole power in this valley is that he stands alone at the top of it, and everybody below owes him. You take that away by cutting them all in on the one thing he can't buy. And there's not a court nor a bank in the territory can stop you from selling water rights on your own land. Abigail Carter stared at him like he'd started speaking a language she'd forgotten she knew. That's... She stopped, started again. You've been thinking about this. Some. Why? Because you couldn't. He said it plainly, no cruelty in it. You've been staring at $400 so long and so scared you can't see past it. That's what fear does. Makes a big thing out of a small one, and hides the small thing that'd save you. I'm not scared of your $400, ma'am. So I could look at it sideways where you couldn't look at it straight. And Abigail Carter did something then that she had not done in front of another living soul in 3 years. She put her face in her hands. She didn't cry. She was too far past knowing how right then. But she stood at her own corral fence and put her face in her hands and let her shoulders drop just for a moment, just long enough to feel the size of the thing she'd been carrying alone. And Harvell stood a careful arm's length away and did not touch her, and did not speak, and did not for the love of God try to fix it, or hold her, or turn it into the moment a lesser man would have turned it into. He just stayed. When she lifted her head, her eyes were dry and her voice was steady again. If this doesn't work, she said, I've shown my whole hand to a hired man I've known 3 weeks. That's true. You could take this to Blackwell tomorrow. He'd pay you well for it. He'd pay you a great deal to know I've got a plan and what it is. He would. Then why won't you? And Harvell looked at her a long moment, and there was something in his face she hadn't seen on any man's face in longer than 3 years. Something without an angle in it. Something that wasn't taking her measure or working an approach or waiting for the thing it wanted. Because I know what it is, he said quietly. To have one thing left that a man could take from you if you let the wrong person close. And I'd sooner cut my own hand off than be the wrong person, Miss Carter. That's all. You don't have to believe it. You won't, I reckon, for a good while yet. But it's true whether you believe it or not." She had no answer for that. For the first time since he'd ridden through her gate, Abigail Carter had no answer at all. They rode down into the valley together that Wednesday to the Hendricks place, which was the biggest of the ranches under Blackwell's thumb and the one whose owner hated him worst. It was Harvell's idea that she go herself, and it near cost him the whole thing. "I'll not go crawling to Ab Hendricks," she'd snapped. "The man said things about me in that valley I'd sooner die than send me. You're a hired hand 3 weeks on. He'll laugh you off the porch. Likely. Or you go, and you're the daughter of the man he respected more than any in this valley come to offer him free of Blackwell's water for the price of standing with you. Which one do you reckon he laughs at, Miss Carter the hand? Or the offer of the one thing he's wanted for 20 years? She went. And Harvell was right, though it near killed her to see it. Ab Hendricks was a hard old man with a hard old grudge, and he stood on his porch and looked down at Abigail Carter for a full minute without a word. And she stood at the bottom of his steps with her chin level and her back straight and did not flinch, and Harvell stood behind her by the horses, and did not say one word because this was hers to win or lose, and they both knew it. "Your daddy," Hendricks said finally, "was the only honest man in this valley." "I know it. And you run off every hand you ever hired, and you're colder than a well-digger's boots, and half this valley thinks you're touched." "I know that too. So why in hell should I?" "Because you hate Thomas Blackwell," Abigail said. "Worse than you hate me, because he's had his boot on your neck for 20 years, and mine's the only water in this valley that isn't his. And because my father, the only honest man in this valley, would want his spring in the hands of men he trusted before he'd want it in Blackwell's. That's why, Mr. Hendricks. Not for love of me. I don't need your love. I need your money and your word, and you need my water, and we can shake on that, or you can keep drinking out of Blackwell's hand till he owns the cups you drink from." Silence. And then Ab Hendricks laughed a great surprised bark of a laugh, and he came down his steps, and he looked at her close, and something moved in the old man's face. "My God," he said softly, "you are his daughter. For a minute there I forgot. You've got his spine exact." He put out his gnarled hand. "How much?" She named the figure. It was fair. He took it without a blink. "And you'll want the others," Hendricks said, already thinking now, already the ally Harvell had promised she'd make. "Pruitt, the Vance brothers, Old Man Cody up the North Fork. Blackwell's squeezed every one of them, and they'll all buy in, and they'll all thank you for the chance." His eyes narrowed sharp and pleased. "You know what you've done, girl. You've done what your daddy never quite managed. You've give this valley a reason to stand together against that man." He shook her hand hard. "Come inside. We've got names to write down." And behind her by the horses, Harvell tipped his hat down to hide his face, because a man ought not let his boss see him look that proud of her. She was different on the ride home. Not soft. Abigail Carter was never going to be soft, and Harvell had come to understand he didn't want her soft, that the world had enough soft women who'd never had to grow the spine she'd grown. But she was lighter in a way, like a horse that had been packed too heavy for too long and had finally set some of it down. They rode a good while without talking, which was the way they both liked it. And then she said, out of nothing, "Where'd you learn it? Money, water rights, playing men against each other like a hand of cards." "Didn't learn it, just looked at it plain." "No." She shook her head. "A man doesn't just look at something like that. You knew about selling shares. You knew the word for it. You knew the law that says a court can't stop me selling water on my own land. That's not looking plain, Harvell. That's knowing." She turned in her saddle to study him. "Who were you before the mountains? Before the worn saddle and no home and $30 a month? You didn't start life as a hired hand. A hired hand doesn't know the things you know. And Harvell was quiet for a long moment, and the mountain went by, and something crossed his face that she'd never seen there the first crack in a wall of his own. "No," he said at last. "I didn't start life as a hired hand." "Then what?" "Leave it, Miss Carter." It wasn't sharp. It was worse than sharp. It was tired, and it was old, and it was the exact tone she used herself when someone got too close to the thing she buried. "You've got your one door you keep shut. Let me keep mine." And Abigail Carter, who had spent 3 years demanding that everyone respect the door she kept shut, understood in that instant that she had just walked up to his and rattled the handle. So she let it go. "All right," she said quietly. "All right. That's fair." And they rode the rest of the way home, in a silence that was different than any silence they'd shared before, because now they each knew the other one had a locked room, and each had chosen for the first time not to force it. Hanintiak. Blackwell found out within the week. Of course he did. He owned too much of that valley for a thing that size to stay quiet. He came up the mountain again, and this time he didn't smile at all. "You clever little witch," he said, standing in her yard with his 2 riders behind him and his voice gone flat and ugly. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Half the valley's crawled out from under me in a week. Hendricks, Pruitt, the Vances, all of them holding papers on your water and telling my collectors to go to hell." He took a step toward the porch. "You've made an enemy today you cannot afford, Miss Carter. I have been patient with you. I have been kind. I offered you a fair price and your dignity, and you spat on both, and now I've got $410, Abigail said. "And change. The notes paid Mr. Blackwell. Went to your own bank Monday morning and laid it on the counter in front of your own clerk, and watched his face while he counted it. So there's nothing here you can take. Not the ranch, not the water, not the note. Nothing." She came to the top of her steps. "You've lost. And the worst of it, the part I truly hope keeps you up nights, is that you lost to a woman alone. A woman with no husband, no man, no name behind her. Just her father's spine and her own 2 hands. She smiled, and it was the first real smile Harvell had ever seen on her, and it was made entirely of iron. "Now get off my land, and this time when I say it's the last time, it's the last time." Blackwell's face had gone gray. "You didn't do this alone," he said suddenly, and his eyes cut past her across the yard to where Harvell stood by the barn. "You. I know you. I've been asking after you, hired man. Nobody in this valley knew your face, so I sent to ask around wider. And do you know what came back?" His ruined smile crawled back onto his mouth. "Nothing. Not one thing. No family, no history, no town that'll claim you. A man with a name and no past. Now what does that tell you, Miss Carter, about the fella you've trusted with your whole ranch?" He looked back at her, and his voice dropped like a knife going in. "Aren't you even a little curious why a man's got no past? What he did, that he had to ride so far up a mountain to bury it?" And Harvell went very, very still. Abigail felt it more than saw it, the stillness of him. The wrongness of it. The way a man goes quiet, not because a thing is untrue, but because it's true, and he never wanted her to hear it. "He's lying," she said. But she didn't sound sure, and she hated that she didn't sound sure, and she hated Blackwell for making her not sure. And most of all, in a place too deep to look at. Directly, she hated the small, cold voice inside her that had waited 3 years to be proven right, that whispered, "Cece, they all have a knife. You only ever have to wait long enough to feel it." "Am I?" Blackwell climbed back into his buggy, satisfied now the damage done worth the whole ruined trip. "Ask him then. Ask your quiet mountain man what his name was before it was Harvell. Ask him why a man handy with a gun and clever with the law came down out of nowhere to hire on cheap at the one ranch in this valley worth taking." He took up the reins. "You wanted to know why I couldn't run off a $14 man off your 15th try. Maybe it's because he isn't a hired hand at all. Maybe he came up here for the water, same as me, just smarter about it. Maybe he's been playing you this whole while, and I just did you the one kindness nobody else in this valley would by telling you so." He drove off, and the dust of him hung in the yard same as the first time. Only this time, Abigail Carter did not stare at the road. She turned slow and looked at the man by the barn. The man who'd caught her when she'd near broke at the fence, who'd gone down Miller's Cut for a calf, who'd handed her the plan that saved her ranch and asked for nothing, who'd stood between her and a gun and told her, "You don't need me, but I was needed," and she looked at him with 3 years of hard-won suspicion rising up in her like floodwater, and she asked him the only question that mattered. Is it true? And Harvell, who had never once lied to her, who had made himself a quiet promise in the dark, that he'd be the one man in her life who never did. Harvell looked at her across the yard. And he didn't say no. The silence in the yard went on too long. Every second of it was a confession. Abigail stood at the top of her steps and waited for the easy word. The "No, ma'am, don't you listen to that man," the quick denial any innocent man would have thrown out fast as breathing. And Harvell didn't throw it. He stood by the barn with his hat in his hand and his eyes on her, and he let the silence say the thing he wouldn't. "You're not going to deny it," she said. Her voice had gone flat and far away, the voice she used for numbers she couldn't pay. "No, ma'am." So he's right. You've got a name that isn't Harvell. You've got a past you buried. You came up this mountain for a reason you never told me. Each word landed harder than the last. And I stood in that yard not 10 minutes ago and told Thomas Blackwell he was lying, and you let me. You stood right there and watched me defend you, and you didn't say a word to tell me I was wrong too. Because you weren't wrong. About which part? It cracked out of her sharp and raw. That's what I don't know, don't you see? That's the thing that man just handed me. I don't know which part. Whether you're wrong about the water, or wrong about the plan, or wrong about you. I trusted you. And I don't hand that out. I haven't handed it out in 3 years, and now I'm standing here doing the exact thing I swore on my father's grave I'd never do again. I'm guessing about a man, and the last time I guessed about a man I lost near everything I had. Harvell took one step toward the porch. Just one. "Then let me tell you," he said, "and you can stop guessing." "You'll tell me now that he's forced it out of you." She laughed, and it was the old laugh, the one with no laugh in it. "That's the whole trouble, isn't it? You'd never have said a word. If Blackwell hadn't come up here and put it in front of me, you'd have kept that door shut till the day you rode off, and I'd never have known there was a room behind it at all. That's true. Stop saying that. Stop saying that's true, like it costs you nothing to be caught. It costs me everything to be caught." It came out of him louder than anything she'd heard from him. The first time in a month, the quiet man had raised his voice, and it stopped her cold because it wasn't anger. It was something breaking. "You think this is easy for me?" His hat was crushed in his fist now. "You think I wanted to stand in that yard and hear him say it and watch your face change? I have been up here a month telling myself the past didn't have to follow me if I just kept my head down and did the work and never let anybody close enough to ask. And then I let you close. That's the mistake. That's the only mistake I made, Miss Carter. I let one person on God's earth start to matter again, and the second I did, here it comes up the mountain in a fine buggy to take it away, same as it always does." He stopped. His chest was heaving. "So no, I wasn't going to tell you, because the last time I told somebody who I was, I lost them, and I couldn't." His voice dropped, and it shook. "I couldn't stand to watch you look at me the way you're looking at me right now." And Abigail Carter, who had spent 3 years learning to read the exact moment a man's charm turned to a lie, looked at Harvell breaking apart in her yard, and could not find the lie anywhere in it. That frightened her worse than anything. "Who were you?" she said, quiet now. "Before." Harvell looked down at his ruined hat. "Not here," he said. "Not shouting across a yard with 2 hands pretending not to listen through the barn wall." He lifted his eyes to her. "You want the truth, you'll have all of it, every last piece, and you can throw me off this mountain after if that's what it comes to. But you'll have it sitting down like a person. Not like this." And she almost said no. He watched her, almost say it watched the reflex rise up the wall, slam back the "get off my land" that had ended 14 men, and would have been so much easier than what he was asking. But she'd seen his face when he said, "I couldn't stand to watch you look at me like that." "The kitchen," she said. "One time. You tell me everything and then I decide." He'd never been inside the main house. In a month, he'd never set foot past the porch because she'd forbidden it that first day, and he'd honored it every day since, and she realized as she watched him step through her door and stand there with his hat in his hands, like a man in a church, that his honoring it was its own kind of proof, and she hated that. Even now, even furious, even betrayed, she was still cataloging reasons to trust him. She put coffee in front of him because her hands needed something to do. She sat across the table. She did not soften her face. "Talk." And Harvell talked. "My name," he said, "was Harvell before it was Harvell." That much was never a lie. But there was a first name that went with it, and a place, and I'll give you both. Nathaniel Harvell, out of Kansas. And 10 years back I wasn't a hired hand, nor a mountain man. I was a lawyer. Abigail's face didn't move, but something behind it did. "That's where the water rights come from," she said slowly. "The shares. The law about selling on your own land. That's where it comes from." He turned the coffee cup a slow half circle on the table and didn't drink it. "I was good at it. Young and good, and full of myself the way a man is when he's good at a thing too early. And I worked for the railroad. You understand what that means out here?" "I understand what it means." Her voice had gone hard. Everyone west of the Mississippi understood what the railroad meant. "It means you took people's land." "It means I took people's land." He said it without flinching, without softening, and that plainness was somehow worse than any excuse. That was the work. The railroad wanted a right-of-way, and there'd be families sitting on it, and my job was to find the flaw in their claim. The missing signature, the unpaid tax, the survey done wrong 40 years back by a drunk. And I was good at it, Miss Carter. I could take a family that had worked a piece of ground for 2 generations, and I could prove, legal and clean and airtight, that it was never truly theirs at all. And then the railroad would pay them 1/10 what it was worth because 1/10 was better than the nothing I'd just proved they were owed. He finally looked up at her. "I did it for 6 years. I did it well. I told myself it was just the law, and the law wasn't mine to make. I only worked it. I told myself the families would have lost the land anyway. I told myself a great many things, and they all worked, right up until the Doyles. The Doyles, a family in the Kansas bottoms. Father, mother, 4 children, and an old grandmother who'd been born on that land before Kansas was a state." Harvell's hands had gone still around the cup. "The railroad wanted it. I found the flaw, same as always. A tax that had gone unpaid 1 year during the war 30 years back when the man who owned it was off fighting and there was nobody home to pay it. A technicality. It was nothing. But it was legal, and I built the case around it, and I stood up in a courthouse and I took their farm." He stopped. "And the old grandmother, the one born on that land, she stood up in the back of that courtroom while I was reading out my clean, airtight argument. And she looked at me, just looked at me, and she said, 'Son, what did we ever do to you?'" The kitchen was very quiet. "I didn't have an answer," Harvell said. "That was the thing. I'd had an answer for everything for 6 years, every clever answer there was. And an old woman asked me the one question in the world I hadn't got a lie ready for, and I stood there in front of the whole court with my mouth open and nothing in it. Because the true answer was nothing. They hadn't done a thing to me. I did it to them for money and for pride. And because I was good at it, and being good at a wicked thing had let me pretend it wasn't wicked." He shook his head slowly. "They lost the farm, moved on. I heard later the old woman didn't live out the winter. First winter she'd ever spent off the land she was born on, and she didn't live through it. And I don't know if that's true, or if somebody told me to punish me, but it doesn't matter, because I believed it. And believing it was the end of the man I was." He pushed the coffee away. "I quit the next week. Walked into the railroad office, and put my papers on the desk, and walked out. And then I did a thing I've never told a living soul." He looked at her. "I spent the next 3 years finding those families, the ones I'd ruined. One by one, all the ones I could track down. And I gave them money. Everything I'd saved, everything I'd earned taking their land in the first place. I'd knock on a door in some sorry rented room in some sorry town, and there'd be a family I'd put there, and I'd give them what I had, and I'd say, "I'm sorry," and most of them slammed the door in my face, and every one of them was right too. His jaw worked. By the end of it, I was broke. Every dollar that dirty money had earned me was back in the hands of the people I took it from, minus what I'd spent chasing them, and I had nothing left but a horse and a saddle, and a name I couldn't stand to hear my first name attached to anymore. So I went up, high as I could go, into the mountains where there wasn't anybody to take anything from, and I figured I'd just end there. Quiet. A man alone doing honest work, harming nobody until it was over. He let out a breath. And then I came down for the summer. For wages. Because even a man trying to disappear has got to eat. And I rode through a gate, and there was a woman standing on a porch telling me I wouldn't last a month. Abigail hadn't moved the entire time. "Why here?" she said, and her voice had changed, though she'd have died before she let him see how. Blackwell asked it too, and I want to hear your answer, not his. A man handy with the law and clever with money, why hire on at a poor ranch about to lose everything? Why not a rich spread that'd pay you double? Because I didn't know it was going to lose everything when I rode in. I told you the truth on the first day I heard you were short on hands. That was all. I wanted quiet work and a bunk and nobody asking questions. He met her eyes, and there was nothing hidden in it now, nowhere left to hide. The rest of it, the note, the water, Blackwell. I walked into that not knowing, and when I found out, when I saw a man using the law like a weapon to take a woman's land right out from under her, over a technicality she couldn't pay. His voice roughened. "Do you understand what that was, Miss Carter? Do you understand what I was looking at? It was me. Blackwell is me 10 years ago in a nicer coat, taking land through the fine print because he could. And I have spent 3 years trying to unmake the man who did that, and here he was doing it again, to you, and this time I had the chance to stand on the other side of it, to be the one who stops it instead of the one who does it." He stopped. "So no, I didn't come up this mountain for your water. But when I saw a way to save it, I'd have crawled over glass to be the man who did. Because saving your ranch was the closest I've ever come to giving that old woman back her farm, and I'll never get to give her anything again. So I gave it to you." The silence after was the loudest thing in the room. Abigail Carter sat across her father's table from a man who had just handed her the one thing she'd sworn no one would ever get from her again. Everything, the whole of himself. The locked room thrown open, and she understood sitting there that she now held exactly the power over him that the snake had once held over her. She could stand up. She could tell him to get his bedroll and get off her mountain. She could take the worst day of his life and use it to break him, the way she'd been broken, and no one in the valley would ever fault her for it. He knew it too. She could see he knew it. He sat there having given her the knife and waited to see if she'd use it. And that he'd handed it over anyway, knowing was the thing that finally cracked her. "Get out," she said. Harvell closed his eyes, just for a second. Then he nodded slow and reached for his hat and stood. No. She was on her feet too, and her voice was shaking, and she didn't know she was crying until she felt it on her face, and it horrified her, and she kept talking anyway. "No, I don't. I mean, get out of my head. I mean, stop. I mean..." She pressed the heel of her hand hard against her eyes. 3 years. 3 years I have known exactly who every person is. The whole valley calls me cold, and I let them, because cold is safe. Cold means nobody gets in close enough to, and I built it. I built the whole thing brick by brick, and it worked. It kept me safe, right up until a quiet man rode through my gate, and wouldn't be run off, and went down a ravine for a calf, and handed me my whole ranch back, and asked for nothing. And now you sit at my father's table, and tell me the worst thing you ever did, and hand me the power to destroy you, and I can't. I can't find the lie. Harvell and I have looked. I have looked so hard, because if there's a lie, then I'm safe. Then it's just the snake again, and I was right all along, and nobody's ever getting in." Her voice broke completely. "But there isn't one. There isn't a lie. There's just a man who did a terrible thing and spent everything he had trying to make it right and came up a mountain to die quiet, and instead he saved my life." Harvell stood very still. "And I don't know what to do with that," she wept. "Because I don't have a wall for it. I built walls for cruel men and lying men and men who wanted something. I never built one for a good one. It never once occurred to me I'd need it." And Nathaniel Harvell, who had not touched her once in a month, who had stood a careful arm's length away every time she'd bled, crossed the kitchen slow, and he did not grab her, and he did not pull her to him. He stopped in front of her, and he waited, hat in his hand, until she looked up. "You don't have to do anything with it," he said quietly. "That's the whole of what I came to tell you under all the rest. You spent 3 years surviving alone. And you're good at it. You're the best I ever saw. But surviving alone and living aren't the same thing, Miss Carter. A body can do the first for a long, long time, and never once do the second." His voice gentled. "You don't have to trust me tomorrow. You don't have to trust me ever. But you cried in front of another human soul tonight, and the mountain didn't fall, and Blackwell didn't win, and you're still standing. That's all trust is. It's finding out the roof holds when you finally set the weight down." He paused. "I'll be in the bunkhouse, same as every night, whether you throw me off in the morning or you don't." He turned to go. "Nathaniel." He stopped at the door. It was the first time she'd said his first name, the name he couldn't stand to hear. The name he'd buried in the mountains and in her mouth. Right then, it didn't sound like the man he'd hated. It sounded like a man being forgiven. "The grandmother," Abigail said. "In the courtroom. Who asked what she ever did to you?" She wiped her face, and her voice was raw but steady. "You've been carrying her 10 years. Answering her question over and over with money and misery and hiding on a mountain." She stood up straighter, her father's spine coming back into her. "You want to know the answer? It's not nothing. You keep saying they did nothing to you like that's the shame of it. But that's backward, Nathaniel. She wasn't asking what they did to deserve it. She was asking you to see them, to look at a family as people instead of a flaw in a claim. And you couldn't back then. That was the sin. Not that you took the land, but that you'd stopped seeing the people you took it from." Her eyes held his. "You see them now. You saw me. Everybody in this valley looked at me for 3 years and saw a witch on a mountain, a flaw in a claim, a woman too cold to bother with. You're the only one who ever stopped and asked what a person has to survive to build walls that high." Her voice dropped. "That old woman's question, you answered it the day you rode through my gate and refused to walk away. You just didn't know it yet." Harvell stood in the doorway of the house he'd never been allowed to enter, holding his hat, and for the first time in 10 years, his face came apart entirely. And a man who had buried a name and a farm woman and the whole of who he'd been wept without any shame at all in the kitchen of a woman who'd sworn she'd never let anybody in. Neither of them said anything for a while. There wasn't anything that needed saying. "Stay," Abigail said at last. Quiet, certain. "Not in the bunkhouse. I mean stay, on this mountain, whatever comes." She almost smiled. "Blackwell's not finished. A man like that doesn't lose a valley and ride off. He'll come back meaner, and he'll come back at both of us now, because he knows what you are to this ranch, even if I only just—" She stopped, started over plainer. "I'll need you, and I've never once in my life said that to a soul and meant it. So hear it while I've got the nerve. I need you, Nathaniel Harvell, not to save me. I can save myself. I've proved that. I need you because I'm tired of proving it alone." Anne Harvell looked at her across the kitchen. This woman nobody could handle, who had just handed him back the one thing he'd thought he'd lost forever on a courtroom floor in Kansas, the belief that a ruined man could still be worth something to somebody. "Then I'll stay," he said, "for as long as you'll have me. And when Blackwell comes back—" His jaw set, and the old lawyer came into his eyes sharp and cold, and finally pointed at the right man. He built his whole life the way I built mine, Miss Carter. On the fine print. On the flaw in the claim. A hard light came into him. And there's nobody alive who knows better than me where a man like that hides his sins in the paper. He wants to fight you with the law. Harvell set his hat on his head. Then I reckon it's time somebody who speaks the language stood on your side of it. Blackwell came back meaner, just as she'd said he would. But he didn't come up the mountain this time. He came at them through the paper the way Harvell had known he would, and it started with a letter delivered by a writer who wouldn't meet Abigail's eye. She read it standing in the yard, and her face went white, and she handed it to Harvell without a word. He read it twice. "Aline," he said. "On the spring. On the spring." Her voice was shaking with fury, not fear. "He can't. That's my land, my water. My father held that spring, free of every man in this valley for 30 years. And this says, what does this even say, Nathaniel, in plain words? Because it's written to be a fog. It says..." Harvell answered slowly, still reading, that Thomas Blackwell holds a prior claim to the water rights on Carter Ridge. That your father back in 1868 took a loan from Blackwell's bank secured against the spring, and that the loan was never fully repaid. He looked up. "It says he's owned a piece of your water for 17 years and is only now calling it in." "That's a lie." She'd gone rigid. "My father never borrowed against that spring. He'd have cut his own arm off first. That water was the one thing I know. He never... I know Abigail." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and it stopped her, and he hadn't even noticed he'd done it. "I believe you. Your father didn't borrow against the spring. Which means this document is a forgery, or it's real paper made to say a false thing. And either way, there's only one place in this valley a lie that size gets written down and made to look legal." He folded the letter. "The bank. His bank. And that's the good news, though it won't feel like it." "How in God's name is any of this good news?" "Because a forged document is a mistake," Harvell said, and the cold, sharp lawyer was fully in his eyes now. The one who'd spent 6 years finding the flaw in other men's claims, and 3 years hating himself for it, and was about to put all of it, every wicked skill, to the only use that had ever felt clean. A man who lies in paper leaves a trail in paper. He has to. That's the nature of the thing. To forge a 17-year-old loan, he had to create it. The ledger entry, the note, the record of a repayment schedule that never happened. And every one of those is a lie. He wrote down somewhere, and a lie written down can be found. He looked at her. "I know how, Abigail. This is the one thing on God's earth I know how to do better than any man in this territory. I spent 6 years doing exactly this to innocent people. Let me spend 1 week doing it to a guilty one." The trouble was, the ledgers were in Blackwell's bank, and Blackwell's bank did not open its books to the woman it was trying to ruin. But Harvell had a plan, and the plan turned on a thing nobody expected. "Old man Cody," he said that night at her father's table, which had become their table, now spread with every paper they owned. "Bought into the water 2 weeks back. Hendricks said so, and Cody's boy. Works at the bank." Abigail sat up straight. "Elias mentioned it once. Cody's youngest clerks for Blackwell. But Nathaniel, that boy's not going to steal from his own employer. He'd lose his. I'm not asking him to steal anything." Harvell shook his head. "I don't need the ledger. I need to see the ledger, 1 hour, with my own eyes and a piece of paper to copy onto. A forged entry. Abigail, a man doesn't forge one careful. He forges it to pass a glance, not a study. He never expects anybody to bring a trained eye to it, because who out here has a trained eye? The ink'll be too fresh for its date. The hand'll be steady where an old entry ought to be faded. There'll be a repayment logged on a Sunday when the bank was closed, or a signature from a clerk who wasn't hired yet in 68. There's always something. I only need to find the one thing, and I only need an hour to find it." He looked at her. "Cody's boy doesn't have to steal. He just has to leave a door unlocked and look the other way for 60 minutes. and a young man whose father just got out from under Blackwell's boot after 20 years, that young man might be persuaded. He was. It took Abigail to persuade him, Abigail riding down to the Cody place herself, and sitting in their parlor and telling the whole valley's worth of it plain, and old man Cody looking at his son and saying, "Quiet. Your grandfather lost 100 acres to that man's bank and never got over it, boy. You do this. You do it for him." And the boy, who was 19 and afraid, looked at his father and then at the woman everyone had called cold, who was sitting in his mother's parlor with tears standing in her eyes, asking him to help her save the one thing her father died holding, and he said yes. Harvell went in on a Thursday night with a lamp and a magnifying glass and 3 sharpened pencils, and he was in there 4 hours instead of 1, and Abigail sat outside on her horse in the dark the whole time, and every minute of it was the longest of her life. He came out gray in the face. "Well..." She was off her horse before he'd shut the door. "Did you find it? Was it there? Nathaniel say something?" "It's worse than a forgery," he said. Her heart dropped. Worse how? Worse for him. And then he smiled, and it was terrible, and it was the smile of a man who had just found, after 10 years, a wound in the world he could finally close clean. "Abigail, your father's loan is a forgery. Yes, the ink's wrong, the date's a Sunday, the whole thing falls apart under a glass. But that's not the half of it." He held up the copied pages, his hand not quite steady. "Blackwell's been doing this for 20 years, not just to you. There are 11 other entries in that ledger just like your father's. 11. Loans that were never made. Liens forged against land he wanted. He's been stealing this whole valley an acre at a time through the fine print, and every stolen acre is written down in his own hand in his own book because he never once believed a soul out here could read it back to him." He lowered the pages. "I didn't just find the flaw in your claim, Abigail. I found the flaw in his. In all of them. I found 20 years of the exact crime I spent 6 years committing, and I copied every line." He says way. Abigail stared at the pages. 11 other families," she said slowly. 11. Hendricks is on there. The Vances. A widow named Pruitt lost 40 acres in 79 to a debt her husband never owed. Harvell's voice had gone quiet. "This isn't just your fight anymore. This never was, really. This is a whole valley he robbed, and the proof of it is in my hand. And there's a federal land office in Denver that would very much like to know that a man's been forging liens against homesteaders for 2 decades. He looked at her. "You wanted to beat him at the law. We're not going to beat him, Abigail. We're going to bury him in it." Happy pie. It should have been the end. It nearly was. But Blackwell had 1 card left, and he played it the way a cornered man plays his last card ugly, and aimed at the softest place he could find. He couldn't reach the ledgers now. Word had gone round, and Cody's boy had quietly copied 3 more pages before he quit, and the evidence was already riding hard for Denver in a saddlebag with Ab Hendricks's fastest man. Blackwell knew he'd lost the paper war, so he stopped fighting on paper. He came for Harvell's name instead. The handbills went up in Silver Creek on a Saturday, printed professional nailed to every post in town, and they told the truth, which was the cruelest thing about them. Nathaniel Harvell. They read railroad lawyer, and underneath a list, the Doyle farm, the families, every piece of land he'd taken in Kansas dug up by a man with money and a grudge laid out for the whole valley to read. "Do you trust her?" "Hired man now," the bottom line asked. "The woman's brought a land thief to your valley. Ask yourself why." Abigail found Harvell staring at one of them in the street, and the valley staring at him, and she watched the thing she'd feared most come true. She watched him start to shrink, to fold in on the old shame, to become again the ruined man who'd ridden up her mountain to die quiet. "They're right," he said low, not looking at her. "That's the worst of it. Every word on that bill is true. I did those things, and now every soul in this valley knows the man standing beside you is a thief, and Blackwell was clever enough to make the truth do his lying for him. I've cost you the valley, Abigail. They'll not follow a woman who keeps company with Nathaniel Harvell. She said it loud, loud enough that the street heard it. And then she did the thing that no one in the history of Silver Creek Valley had ever seen Abigail Carter do. She stepped up onto the water trough in the middle of the street, and she raised her voice to the whole town. "You've all read the bill?" she called out. "Every one of you. So let me save you the trouble of whispering it behind your hands." Yes. This man was a railroad lawyer. Yes, he took land from families that didn't deserve to lose it. It's all true, every line. And Thomas Blackwell paid good money to dig it up because he wants you to look at the worst thing this man ever did and decide that's the whole of him. She swept the street with her eyes, and not a soul moved. Well, I'm the coldest woman in this valley. You've all said so for 3 years. So you'll believe me when I say I don't hand out kind words, and I'm about to hand out some now, so listen close because you'll not hear their like from me again. She pointed at Harvell standing frozen in the street. This man took land through the fine print, and then he spent every dollar he ever earned doing it, giving it back to the people he took it from. Broke himself doing it, gave away everything, and rode up into the mountains with a horse and a saddle to live out his days alone, because he couldn't stand the shame of what he'd done. Her voice cracked and she pushed through it. How many of you have ever done a wrong and then spent 3 years and every dollar you owned trying to unmake it? Raise your hands. Go on, I'll wait. Nobody moved. That's what I thought. This man has done more to answer for his sins than any one of you has ever done to answer for your smaller ones. And I'd sooner stand beside a thief who spent his life becoming an honest man than beside an honest man who never once had to. She turned and pointed toward Blackwell's bank at the end of the street. And while you're all so worried about his past, ask yourselves about the man who paid to print these bills. Because I've got proof in that man's own hand in his own ledgers that Thomas Blackwell has forged loans against 12 families in this valley over 20 years. 12. A murmur went through the crowd, now rising. The Pruitt widows' 40 acres, the Vance bottomland, Hendricks, and my father's spring, a loan my father never took, written down in Blackwell's book to steal my water the same way he stole your land. That proof is riding to the federal office in Denver right now, and there's not a handbill in the world can outrun it. She stepped down off the trough, and her voice dropped, and it carried anyway, because the whole street had gone dead silent to hear it. So you go on and choose. Choose the thief who spent his life making it right, or choose the thief who's still robbing you blind and just spent good money hoping you'd be too busy judging a stranger to notice. Icky shout out. For a long moment nobody said anything at all. Then old Ab Hendricks, who'd ridden into town for feed and stayed for the show, took off his hat and said loud, "The widow Pruitt's my neighbor. Been mourning them 40 acres for 6 years. He put his hat back on. "I'm with the Carter girl." And then it broke all at once, the way a log jam breaks a second voice and a third, and then the whole street, 20 years of stolen acres finding their tongue at last. And Abigail Carter stood in the middle of it, having done in 5 minutes what her father never managed in 30. She'd turned a whole valley from a mob into an army, and she'd done it to defend a man. Harvell couldn't speak. She crossed to him through the noise and stood close so only he could hear. "You cost me nothing," she said. "You hear me nothing. That bill was the best thing Blackwell ever did for me. It made me stand up on a horse trough and say a true thing out loud in front of the whole valley, and I've never once in my life said a true thing out loud that mattered." Her eyes were bright. "I told you I was tired of proving it alone. Well, that's the last time I prove anything alone. From here on we prove it together, and God help Thomas Blackwell, because a cold woman and a reformed thief who both know exactly how a wicked man thinks are the 2 worst enemies he could have made." It came apart for Blackwell fast after that, the way these things do once the first stone slips. The federal marshal came out from Denver in 3 weeks. He'd read the copied ledgers, and then he came and read the originals, and the originals were worse than the copies, because a man who forges for 20 years and never expects to be caught gets sloppy. And Harvell had told the marshal exactly where to look, and exactly what a fresh lie in an old ledger looked like under a glass. 12 forged liens. 12 families, and a signature on the spring lien that Blackwell had written in a green ink. His bank didn't stock until 1871, 3 years after the loan it claimed to record. They arrested Thomas Blackwell in his own bank on a Tuesday morning, and the whole valley came to watch, and Abigail Carter was not among them, because she was up on her mountain that morning doing a thing that mattered more. She was showing Harvell the spring. She'd never shown it to a living soul. Her father had shown it to her once when she was small, and told her it was the beating heart of the whole valley, and that it was hers to protect, and she'd protected it for 3 years alone, and shown it to no one. And she walked Harvell up to it that Tuesday morning, while the valley below arrested the man who'd tried to steal it, and she stood beside him at the water. Her father died holding, and she said, "I've never brought anybody here. Not one person in 3 years." "I know. You told me." "Do you know why I'm bringing you?" Harvell looked at her, and he didn't guess, because he'd learned not to guess with her, learned to just wait, and let her say the thing herself. "Because it stopped being just mine," Abigail said quietly. "Somewhere in the last month, and I didn't even feel it happen." That's the thing about walls, Nathaniel. You spend years building them so high, nobody can get over, and you're so busy watching the top of them that you never notice somebody's just walked in through a door you forgot you left open. You didn't climb my wall. 14 men tried to climb it, and I threw every one of them down. You just... Her voice caught. You just stood outside it long enough and patient enough that one day I opened the door myself and asked you in. And I can't even be angry about it because I did it. I opened the door. You never once pushed. "No," Harvell said. "I never pushed." "Why not 14 men pushed? Why were you the only one who—" "Because I wasn't trying to get in Abigail." He turned to face her fully. "That's what none of them understood. And it's the only thing I understood because I'd been on the other side of it. Every one of those men wanted through your wall so they could get something your ranch, your hand, the satisfaction of being the one who cracked the cold woman. They wanted the prize. I didn't want anything. I told you that the first week, and you didn't believe me, and I don't blame you. But it was true. I'd already given up wanting things. I came up this mountain empty. And a man who's not trying to get anything from you." He shook his head slowly. "He's got no reason to push. He can just stand there, as long as it takes. And that, I think, is the only thing in the whole world that a wall like yours can't stop. Because a wall's built to keep out the people who want in. It's got no defense at all against a man who's content to stay outside it forever if that's what you need." Abigail Carter looked at the man beside her. Spring, the man the whole valley had called a thief, the man who'd ridden up her mountain to die, and instead had given her back her ranch, her father's legacy, her own buried self, and for the first time in 3 years, in front of another living soul, without shame, and without fear, and without a single wall left standing between her heart and her face, she laughed. It came up out of her like water out of the ground, the same as the spring from someplace deep and covered over, that everyone had thought was dry, and it went on, and it was helpless, and it was young, and Harvell had never heard anything in his life. He wanted to hear more. "There it is," he said softly. "There's what—" She managed, still laughing, wiping her eyes. "Elias told me you used to laugh. Before. Said you were the warmest, laughingest girl in Silver Creek before the world taught you to bury it." He was smiling now, to a real one, the first full smile he'd worn in 10 years. "I've been up here a month wondering if it was true, wondering what it'd sound like." He looked at her, and there was no wall on either side of them now, none at all. "It sounds like the best thing I ever heard, Abigail Carter, and I aim to spend a long time making sure I get to hear it again." "Bitteschön." Well said. And Abigail, who nobody could handle, who'd broken 14 men, who'd sworn on her father's grave that no living soul would ever get close enough to hurt her again, reached out and took the hand of the quiet mountain cowboy who'd refused to leave and held it, and did not let it go. Below them in the valley, the church bell was ringing. Someone had started it the moment the marshal walked Blackwell out, and the sound of it came up the mountain clear and bright, ringing out over 12 families getting their land back over a valley finally free of the man who'd owned it, over a spring that would run free for all of them now, instead of feeding one man's greed. But Abigail wasn't listening to the bell. She was listening to the sound of her own laughter, still ringing in her own ears. A sound she'd thought was gone forever, and to the quiet man beside her, who'd waited outside her wall, long enough to hear it come back. The bell was still ringing when they came down off the mountain, and the valley that had called Abigail Carter cold for 3 years stood waiting in the street to thank her, and she didn't know what to do with any of it. That was the first surprise of the weeks that followed. Not that the valley turned, but that it turned so hard and so fast. The widow Pruitt got her 40 acres back by federal order and came up the mountain herself to press a jar of preserves into Abigail's hands, and couldn't speak for crying. Ab Hendricks started calling her the Carter Girl, like it was a title of honor instead of a way of keeping her small. And men who'd crossed the street to avoid her a month before now tipped their hats when she rode through Silver Creek, and it unsettled her so badly that she said to Harvell one evening, honest, as she'd learned to be with him and no one else, "I don't know how to be like Nathaniel. I know how to be feared. I spent 3 years getting good at feared. This," she gestured at nothing at the whole changed valley, "this I don't have any practice at." "You'll learn it," he said, "same as you learned the other. Only this one you get to keep." But it wasn't the valley that changed her. She'd told him that at the spring, and it stayed true. The valley's opinion had never once been able to reach her. That was the whole armor of her, that she'd stopped needing anyone's opinion the day the snake taught her what opinions were worth. What changed her was smaller than a valley and closer than a street. It was a quiet man who rose before her every morning and worked past her every night, and never once in all the weeks after Blackwell fell tried to become anything to her that she hadn't already asked him to be. That was the thing she kept waiting for. She'd braced for it without knowing she was bracing. She kept waiting for the moment he'd cash in, the moment the patient man revealed he'd been patient for something. The way the snake had been kind for something, the way every soul she'd ever trusted had turned out to be running a longer game than she'd seen. She waited a week, then a month. She caught herself one morning actually watching for it, actually standing at her window looking for the con. And she realized she was doing it, and she felt ashamed, and she went out to the corral where he was gentling a horse, and she said it out loud because they'd made a rule between them, wordless but ironclad, that neither of them buried a true thing anymore. "I keep waiting for you to want something," she said. Harvell didn't stop his work. "I know. You know. Course I know. I've watched you do it for weeks." He ran his hand slow down the horse's neck. "You're waiting for the bill to come due. For me to turn around one morning and tell you what all this patience cost and what I expect back for it." He glanced at her. "That right?" "Yes. It's a fair thing to wait for," he said, and there was no hurt in it, only understanding. "You waited 3 years to feel safe. And then a man used that against you in the cruelest way there is. A body doesn't unlearn that because a marshal hauled off one banker. You'll be waiting for the bill a long while, yet Abigail and I'm not going to tell you to stop because you can't, and telling you to just be one more man telling you how to feel in your own skin." He turned to face her. "So here's what I'll do instead. I'll just keep on not sending one. Every morning I don't want anything from you is another morning the waiting was wrong. And one day, not soon I reckon, but one day you'll wake up and notice the bill never came, and it'll have been so long since it didn't come that you'll finally believe it isn't coming." He went back to the horse. "That's the only way through it, I know. You can't argue a person into feeling safe. You can only outlast their reasons not to." And Abigail stood at the corral fence and understood that this right here was the thing the 14 men had never had and never could have had, not patience for a prize, but patience with no prize at all at the end of it. Patience as the whole of the gift. "You're a strange man, Nathaniel Harvell," she said, and her voice was thick. "I've been told. I'm going to marry you." It came out of her before she'd decided to say it, the plainest, most naked thing she'd ever spoken aloud, and she heard herself say it and didn't take it back. "Not because you saved the ranch. Not because you're kind though you are. I'm going to marry you because you're the only person I've ever met who understood that the way to reach me was to stop trying to reach me. And I've decided I'd be a fool to let a thing like that ride back off down a mountain." Harvell went very still. his hand flat on the horse's flank. Then he turned slow, and there was something in his face she'd never seen. Not on him. Not on anybody ever. The look of a man who'd given up on being wanted so completely that he'd forgotten it was even a thing that could happen to him. "Abigail," he said, and his voice wasn't steady. "You don't have to. I know I don't have to. That's the whole point. I've spent 3 years doing only the things I had to and none of the things I wanted, because wanting things is how they get you. And I am so tired, Nathaniel, of never wanting anything out loud." She stepped through the corral gate and crossed to him and stood close as she'd stood at the spring. "So I'm wanting something out loud. For the first time since I buried my father. I want you. Not to save me. I saved myself. We've established that I'll never stop reminding you." A shaky laugh. "I want you because I've been alone so long I forgot there was another way to be, and you reminded me, and I'll not go back to forgetting it. Now, are you going to make me stand here having said all that with no answer, or are you going to—" He kissed her. It was the first time he'd touched her past a hand, and he did it careful the way he did everything, ready to stop the second she needed him to. She didn't need him to. They married beneath the summer sky in the meadow above the spring, and the whole valley came. That was the second surprise, and the one that undid her worse than the first. She'd expected a small thing, the two of them, a preacher, maybe Silas and Elias, to stand up as witnesses. She had not expected the wagons to start coming up the mountain road at dawn. She had not expected the widow Pruitt with an armful of wildflowers, or Ab Hendricks in a suit 40 years old that he could barely button, or old man Cody and his boy, the boy who'd left a door unlocked and changed everything standing shy at the back. She had not expected the Vances and the Reeds and the McCabe's and every family Blackwell had robbed coming up her mountain to see the cold woman wed the reformed thief, because they'd decided somewhere in the last weeks that these two broken people had given them all something back that they'd thought was gone for good. Abigail stood at the edge of it all before the ceremony and couldn't move, and Silas found her there. "You all right, Miss Carter?" "They came," she said, dazed. "Silas, they all came. 3 months ago they'd have crossed the street to spit at me. I don't, why would they?" The old fence mender looked at her, and then at the crowd, and then back. "You want to know what I think?" he said. "I think for 3 years this whole valley looked at you and saw a wall. And they never once thought about the person behind it, because a wall's easy to hate and a person's not. And then that man of yours came along." He nodded toward where Harvell stood waiting. "And he didn't see a wall at all. He saw the person. And once one man does that out loud, once one man stands up on a horse trough, well, turns out everybody else could have seen it too, all along. They just needed somebody to show 'em how to look." He patted her arm gruff. "You didn't change, girl. Don't you ever think you changed. You were always the person behind the wall. He just taught the whole valley to see what was there the whole time." And Abigail Carter walked out to meet her cowboy with that ringing in her ears, and it was truer than anything the preacher said. They spoke their vows, simple. Harvell's hands shook the whole time, and hers didn't, and afterward he told her that was exactly right, that she'd done all her shaking 3 years ago, and it was only fair he'd do his now. And when the preacher said the words and it was done, Abigail turned to the valley that had called her cold, that she'd never once tried to win, that had come up her mountain anyway, and she did something no one expected. She thanked them. "I owe you an apology," she said, and the crowd went quiet. 3 years I gave this valley nothing but a hard word and a harder look. I let you all think I hated you. It was easier than the truth, which is that I was so afraid of being hurt again that I decided to hurt first every time so nobody could get the jump on me." She found Harvell's hand and held it. "That was a small way to live. I know that now. A man had to ride up my mountain and refuse to leave to teach me it, but I know it now. So thank you for coming, for forgiving a woman who never once asked to be forgiven. And I'll spend the rest of my life up here being a better neighbor than I was, which won't be hard since I could scarcely be worse." It got a laugh, the whole valley laughing with her, not at her, the first time in her life that had ever happened, and the sound of it rolled out over the meadow, and Abigail thought she might come apart from the pure, unfamiliar warmth of it. The years came on the way years do. Carter Ridge became the strongest ranch in the high country. But not the way Blackwell had ever understood strength. It wasn't the cattle count, or the acres though those grew. It was the water the spring her father died protecting that she'd nearly lost that now ran free to 12 families who'd once been robbed and who never forgot who'd freed it. Every one of those families would have ridden through fire for Abigail Carter, and she knew it, and it was the deepest wealth she owned. Blackwell had spent 20 years trying to own the valley through fear and paper. Abigail had won it in a single summer by giving her water away, and the giving had bought her something. Blackwell died in a territorial prison, never once possessing a valley full of people who loved her. Harvell never went back to the law, but the law came to him. Word got around what he'd done, how a ruined railroad lawyer had turned his wicked skill against a wicked man and broken 20 years of theft in a single week. And men started riding up the mountain with papers they couldn't read, and troubles they couldn't fight. Homesteaders with liens they suspected were false widows with debts they didn't recognize. And Harvell read every one of them for free, at the kitchen table that had become their table, and he found the flaws in the wicked claims, the way he'd once found flaws in the honest ones. And he gave those families back their land, one at a time, all the years of his life, the exact undoing of the exact sin over and over, until the old woman's question in the Kansas courtroom finally went quiet in him. He told Abigail about the day it went quiet. "An old man came up today," he said one evening years in. "Homesteader down the South Valley. Blackwell's bank was gone, but the men who bought its paper were near as bad, and they'd forged a lien on his place, same as they did your daddy's. I found it. Took me an hour. Green ink, wrong year, the same tired trick." He was quiet a moment, and when I told him it was false that he'd keep his land, he grabbed my hand and he cried and he said, "Mister, what did I ever do to deserve a man like you helping me?" Harvell looked at her. "And Abigail, for 10 years, I've been waiting to hear a version of that question, because it's the same one the grandmother asked me, only turned inside out. What did we ever do to you? And I always thought if I heard it enough times said kind instead of cruel, it might, I don't know, balance something." He shook his head slowly, but it didn't balance anything, because I finally understood standing there that I'd been asking the wrong thing my whole life. It was never about balancing the ledger. You can't. Some things you break can't be unbroken, and that old woman's gone, and no amount of good I do brings her back or makes what I did to her right. He took Abigail's hand. "What that old man taught me today is that you don't do the good to pay off the bad. You do it because a broken man who spends his life mending other broken things is still worth something. Not because he balanced out, because he kept going, because he turned the thing that ruined him into the thing he saves people with." His voice was steady now, steadier than she'd ever heard it. "The grandmother's question finally went quiet today. Not because I answered it, because I stopped needing to. I'm not the man who took her farm anymore. I haven't been for a long time. I just needed to do enough good to believe it." Abigail held his hand and said nothing, because there wasn't anything to say, and they'd learned long ago the difference between the silences that needed filling and the ones that didn't. There were children in time, 2 of them, a boy with Harvell's quiet and a girl with Abigail's spine, and the valley watched them grow the way it watched its own. And the story of how they came to be got told and retold at every table in Silver Creek, growing in the telling, the way the best stories do, until children who hadn't been born when Blackwell fell knew it by heart, the cold woman nobody could handle, and the mountain cowboy who refused to leave. But the tellers always got one thing wrong, and it was the thing that mattered most, and Abigail corrected it every time she heard it all the long years of her life. They told it as a rescue. They told it as the story of a good man who came up a mountain and saved a broken woman and taught her how to love again. And every time some well-meaning soul told it that way in her hearing. Abigail Carter. Abigail Harvell. Now, though, the valley still called her Carter as often as not. And she'd stopped minding, would set down whatever she was holding and set them straight. "He didn't save me," she'd say. And she said it fierce every time because it was the truest thing she knew, and she'd not have it told wrong. Get that out of your heads, all of you. A man cannot save a woman, and any woman who's waiting on one to do it will wait her whole life and die still waiting. He didn't save me." And then her voice would gentle the way it only did for this one thing. "He stayed. That's a different thing entirely, and it's the only thing that ever mattered. 14 men came up my mountain wanting to save me, and I threw every one of them down it because I didn't need saving, and I never did. And then one man came who didn't want to save me at all. He just wanted to stay. To stand outside a wall that everybody else tried to climb and wait patient as the mountain itself until I got tired enough of being alone behind it that I opened the door, my own self, and asked him in. She'd look around at whoever was listening, and there was iron in it, and love. I healed myself. I want that understood. Every wall I tore down with my own 2 hands. But I couldn't have done it if there hadn't been one soul in all the world content to stand outside and wait however long it took. That's what he gave me. Not rescue. Time. He gave me the time to save myself, and he never once rushed it. And he never once asked what it was costing him to wait. And then always the same close-spoken soft as a benediction. A person who's been hurt doesn't lose the power to love. They just lose the belief that it's safe to. And all it takes to give that belief back is one soul patient enough to prove them wrong, not by breaking down their walls, but by being so steady so long that they finally choose to walk out from behind them on their own. Abigail Carter lived to be an old woman on that mountain, with her cowboy beside her nearly to the end, and the valley full of people who loved her, and the spring still running free. And when folks who didn't know better called her lucky. Lucky to have been found, lucky to have been saved. Lucky that a good man happened up her road that summer, she'd fix them with that old level stare, the one that had frightened 14 men and outlasted a banker, and never once in all her long life learned how to tell a lie. Luck had nothing to do with it, she'd say. I was never a woman who needed saving, and he was never a man who tried to. I built the walls myself, and I tore them down myself, and the only thing that quiet man ever did was refuse to leave while I did it. And I am telling you now with my whole heart, and every year I've lived to back it, there is no force on this earth stronger than one person who simply will not walk away. Not fear, not cruelty, not 20 years of a rich man's paper. Nothing. A patient soul who stays is the most powerful thing God ever made. And I know it for certain, because one of them stayed for me and it saved a life I'd long since given up as lost. Mine. I saved it. But he's the reason I finally believed it was worth saving.